Chatting with Levi Stevenson, Wide Right Natty Delight, which that's reason enough to interview you. Is the name of your website and podcast
Yeah.
and services. So appreciate it. Um, I'm going to start with. I'm going to go out of order of operations because I know you're going to bring him up anyway. So I want to be the first to bring him up. But going into the fall season, I was assuming all we were going to hear was Chuba Hubbard. All right, Chuba Hubbard, and we were going to expect him to be a front runner for obviously Big 12 Player of the Year. And his injury aside, whatever, that didn't happen. But then this guy named Brees Hall came around, and I was talking to John Walters, I guess
Yeah.
after the Oklahoma game, and he was telling me that even last year, his freshman year, that Brees was the real deal, and now, I mean, All American status easily. Can you go in a little bit more about Brees? And can I assume this is his last year?
Yeah, so Brees Hall it's an interesting story, and actually, it's funny that you said that he kind of came out of nowhere, and maybe on the national stage he probably did, but to Iowa State fans, we kind of knew what we had in Brees Hall before the season, especially if you look like his freshman year where he played 8 games or something like that, he averaged like 130 yards a game or something like that for his 8 games of his freshman year. Um, but what makes Brees Hall so special is he's got incredible vision. He's really elusive. I don't know if you remember Dave Montgomery, our running back before him. Really elusive, incredible vision, just impossible to tackle. Brees is not quite as shifty as David was, but he's a little bit more of a one cut downhill type of runner. You hear a lot of comparisons like a Corey Dillon, that kind of guy. He's elusive in space, but he still runs with power. But he's got another level of speed. He's got another gear on top of what David had, where David would break, he'd evade tackles, he'd break tackles, and he'd get 15, 20 yards, and he would do that over and over and over again. Brees is capable of busting out these long runs. He's got a top gear that David didn't have before him, and I mean, I think he led the nation in like 70 plus yard or 50 plus yard touchdown runs last year, and he's perfect for the offense because the offense runs a zone blocking scheme similar to like what you're going to see at Iowa or Wisconsin. And he's really, really good. He's a nice pace. He's a very patient runner. And when you have an offensive line that's playing well, plus obviously have the tight ends that are really, really good run blockers on the outside, they can create an edge. He's really good at being patient, being kind of a slow to fast through kind of guy. He's really, really good at that. He's got the burst you need to punch through, to run past some defenders, run through a bunch of them. He's a complete package. I mean, he wasn't asked to receive. He wasn't asked to catch the ball out of the backfield a lot, but he did all the time his freshman year. And if you look at it back at his high school highlights, they'd line him up out wide. So I mean, he's a very good receiver when they need him to be. He just wasn't asked to last year, but there are no holes in Brees Hall's game.
Let's now go to what would normally be my starting question, but because I knew you were going to talk about Brees from the moment go forward, so might as well go and get that over and done with and out the way.
Yeah.
So you finally jumped off the Auburn train after Gene Chizik and Paul Rhodes, and now you have Matt Campbell, and I see a little smirk on your face. If you notice behind me, okay, so we can have that conversation, and I know that conversation all too well. Okay, but Matt Campbell seems to be a home run. The both Oklahoma games, even in the Big 12 title game, where it was 21-24, I believe, on the small side, hell of an efforts. The Oregon game in the Fiesta Bowl was a complete one-sided domination. What more can I say about Matt Campbell that I don't know of, or that the average person doesn't know of? And is this now just the beginning of Matt Campbell?
That's kind of the last question you asked there is kind of the $1 million question. But what makes Matt Campbell really interesting? There's a lot of different things that make him really interesting. But he came from when he came out of high school, he was originally at Pitt as a player, and then he transferred out of Pitt and went to D3 Mount Union after year. And for anybody that doesn't isn't really plugged into college football. Mount Union is a Division III powerhouse. I mean, they won national titles, based almost all the time for 40 years. I mean, they're an unbelievable powerhouse. He played for a guy named Larry Karras, who's a legendary coach. I mean, I think he's the all-time leader in wins at the college at any level of college football. Um, and he's kind of modeled himself after that and after his high school coach from Perry High School in Ohio. But the way he builds his programs and the way he runs it is a little bit different than you see a lot of different places, where he was focused right away on establishing a culture, establishing a winning culture. Where you're developing, where you have player led, where you have player driven leadership, where you have guys putting in that extra time that necessarily they maybe don't putting in, having good work habits, good nutrition habits, good habits in the classroom. And you have to start from the ground up on that, especially with a program like Iowa State that had lost for so long, that was really bad for a long time. You really have to start from ground zero with that, with building up a program like that. And I would say had a couple decent players here and there. They had Alan Lazard, who's a really good receiver. They had a few pieces here and there, but nothing really spectacular. But the way he kind of has built the program is kind of from the inside out. Is you're starting with the offensive and defensive lines, and you're using that as your core. Using the trenches as your core, and you're building out from there. Now, building out your quarterbacks and your skill positions is a lot faster than building out an offensive line. Offensive line takes a while. I mean, you get a fresh kid out of high school, unless he's some prodigy. Yeah, I mean, he's probably not playing at all for at least a couple years. They're going to be sitting there. He's going to be building up their body, getting experience, getting reps. Offensive line takes a long, long time to build. Defensive line doesn't take quite as long, but still takes a little while to build up depth, especially. But the skill positions came fairly quickly. You had Dave Montgomery. You already had Alan Zard. You have Hakeem Butler. Then you're building out on the defense as well. So he's taken kind of an old school approach where you're building out the lines, where you're building out the offensive and defensive lines, but you're really building out the defense as a whole. And where that kind of took shape was in 2017 against Texas. It was a terrible, terrible game. Didn't go well at all. But what we saw the very first time there in that game was the three-man front that Iowa State is now kind of well known to run. That's where it started. And while they didn't win that game because the offense was really, really unbelievably bad, the defense was lights out that game. And what happened the next week? They go down to Norman and they beat Oklahoma. And that started. Then the legend of Matt Campbell is created. Starting there, then they have their undefeated October. They beat TCU at home. And then the story kind of keeps writing itself from there. But all of this time, even after 2017, we're hearing Matt Campbell's leaving. He's going here. He's going here. He's going here. He's leaving. He's going to go take the next job he can that has a little bit of pay cut or has a little bit of a pay raise. He's going to go do it. He's going to get out of there. I would say it's a stepping stone and all this. And every single year he comes back. He keeps renewing his contract because he's not the kind of guy he's not the stepping stone kind of coach. He's really deeply, deeply loves the process of transforming boys into men, into young men, into productive players, into productive human beings off the field and outside of college. And once they get out into the real world, he deeply treasures that process. And when you start hopping and skipping around to different jobs, you don't get a chance to see a guy like Chase Allen that came in his first year. He redshirted, got hit by a car like this in the middle of his first season, and has developed and blossomed in over the course of this will be his 6th season now, but over the course of his career, watching him develop into one of the better tight, obviously the guy ahead of him, Charlie Kohler, is very, very good. But Chase Allen, you're seeing him develop. You're seeing guys like Brock Purdy. They started as a freshman. Now you're seeing him grow and develop. And Mike Rose is another good one there. But, there's lots of good examples of it. But he's building the program in kind of an old school way where you're building it from your core. You're really making sure your core is good. It's consistent. They have excellent consistency of their culture all the way from the walk-ons all the way up to Jamie Pollard, the athletic director. That it's a consistent culture that all the way through that helps you work through talent turnover, losing Dave Montgomery and Hakeem Butler, 2 of the 5 or 6 best skill players in school history, losing those in the same year and coming back and the offense somehow gets better. you have to have a strong culture, and you have to have a good quarterback. You have to have all of this to make that happen, and he did, because that's how he's built his program. He's built the program to have success even beyond. If he leaves after next season, the program is in a place right now that it can be successful beyond Matt Campbell. He's laying concrete foundations, not just building a quick house and seeing what he can find.
Let's talk about that defense.
Yeah.
All right. So if I'm right, and I'm going to read from my own numbers to make sure I'm reading it correctly.
Yeah.
Number one, rushing defense. Number two, total defense. And number two, scoring defense. And you're having about 8 projected starters returning.
I think it's nine. There's nine starters returning.
All right. So it's not. So it's
Yeah.
9 starters returning. Can you go into that defense a little bit?
Yeah, so the way the 3-man front works, I mean, that's pretty self-explanatory. You have a nose tackle and 2 ends, and then they usually play, and they usually have their 3 linebackers. Mike Rose, everybody kind of knows who Mike Rose is. Orion Vance and Jake Hummel. Jake Hummel is a Mike Rose clone. They're basically exactly the same player. If they didn't wear different numbers and didn't have different sock length on the field, you wouldn't be able to tell them apart. And then behind that, you have safeties, and the safeties have really been a key part of this, because they play 2 high safeties plus kind of a roving kind of a nickel back. They call it the star position. So other players, every team calls it a different position. But you have Greg Eisworth, who's been there this is his 4th season now after being a JUCO transfer. And you have Lawrence White was back there. He just graduated, but you had Lawrence White back there for a long time. Now you've got Shane Young. You've had incredible consistency at the back end of that. The corners have been hit or miss. Brian Peavy was really good for a while, and then he graduated. Anthony Johnson is now kind of taken that mantle. Still looking for a second corner, but it's really, the defense is really built up the center. It's the nose tackle, the middle linebacker, and the high safety. That's really kind of the core of that defense, and you're playing from the middle out. And you would think that a team that's only playing 3 down linemen would be vulnerable to the run. But the defense, the way they fit run gaps, the way the personnel they have, where they're quick side to side, where they can cover sideline to sideline. When you have that personnel and that scheme, they're, like you said, they're leading the conference on rush defense. Basically, like each of the last 3 or 4 years, they've done that. They've been really, really good against the run, and that's been the backbone of the rise of Matt Campbell, is this defense, where they've kept him in games where, while the offense is trying to catch up with the offensive line, trying to be built from scratch, basically, and trying to, sit on the back of Brock Purdy, who first started as a true freshman, and you're trying to bring in new skill position players. You're trying to build the offense up from scratch and build it up the right way with a good foundation on the offensive line. It takes time, so that the offense is going to lag behind. The defense has done an incredible job of being the backbone of that. And it's basically, it's stopping the run and keeping everything in front of you on the pass. They don't get beat deep. They make offenses be patient. And if you're a West Virginia found this out in 2018. They learned the lesson the hard way, because West Virginia's offense that year with Will Greer, and they had Dana Holgerson was their coach there, and Will Greer was the quarterback. And they had David Sills and things like that, some really, really nice players. That offense thrived on deep passes. They took chunks down the field, 20, 30, 40 yards at a time, and that's how they scored. Well, Iowa State was playing their kind of their bend don't break type of defense, and West Virginia found out the hard way that you can't just keep trying to chuck it deep against that defense. It doesn't work. You have to be patient. You have to be willing to take the 3, 4, 5 yard dink and dunk type pass, and you have to be okay with doing that the whole game. And the defense is built to be kind of a trap, where you do this, they get impatient, they chuck one deep, like Oklahoma did this past season, where they got impatient, they tried to hit one deep at the end of the game. Shane Young is sitting there in the end zone, picks it off, ends the game. And that's really, it's the genius of John Haycock. He's one of the most underappreciated defensive coordinators in the entirety of college football. And he's been every bit as important as Matt Campbell in this whole turnaround. And it's an incredible defense that you're starting to see pop up more and more. Brent Venables spent the summer in Ames a couple years ago, and that's how Clemson's defense has continued to transform. He's had NFL coaches stop in. I mean, if you have anywhere on your schedule, if you have at least a couple teams that are running some air raid passing concepts, not the Mike Leach air raid is pretty much gone except for Mike Leach. He's the only one that runs the Mike Leach air raid anymore. But even passing games are still using a lot of those concepts, even if they're not going full air raid, pass every time. And if you're going against a team like that that uses those route combinations and just those general air raid passing concepts, this three down front is an air raid killer. That's what it does. It's really good at knocking down the air raid, even when you have, even when you're going up against a Heisman caliber quarterback, like they did with Will Grier, or like they did with Spencer Rattler, or like they did with Baker Mayfield. It's an air raid killer, and that's why they keep playing it. They'll have to keep adapting because everybody's got film on it now. It's not an every defense has vulnerabilities somewhere. It doesn't matter who it is. You can have the 85 Bears, and they've got holes. They do. Every defense, like perfect offense always beats perfect defense. So they're going to have to keep evolving. They're going to have to keep developing personnel and getting more talent in there as well. But it's been the backbone, and it will continue to be the backbone as long as it continues to be successful.
This was good stuff. Thanks, Levi.